Are you going to recommend to the president that he stops criticizing the Pope in social media?
Why would I tell you what I'm going to recommend to the president?
Hi, thanks for doing this. I wanted to ask you first about your meetings yesterday with the Pope Leo. President Trump has had very harsh language and words for the Pope against the backdrop of the war in Iran. Did you make amends with the Pope yesterday?
No, we had a very good meeting. I mean, ultimately, it's important. First of all, there's a lot that we work together with the church, and we talked about those areas that we're working together on, different parts of the world. I know everyone's interested in, the other aspects of it, but I expressed, updated them on the situation with Iran, expressed our point of view about why this was an important, and the danger that Iran poses to the world, which is largely recognized. So obviously the Holy Father is a spiritual leader. He's the first and foremost. I mean, that's his role to play. And obviously the church has always interacted on behalf of a mission for peace and a respect for all of humanity. But at the end, it was a very cordial and important meeting, and it's important to share our points of view and an explanation and an understanding of where we're coming from. And I thought it was very positive.
He went to the Vatican to explain to the Pope why the Iran war was necessary. The Secretary of State flew to Rome to brief the spiritual leader of 1.4 billion Catholics on American military policy, and then described the meeting as very positive because the Pope listened. That is not diplomacy. That is a justification tour.
Secretary Rubio, you also mentioned talking about the Western Hemisphere with the Pope. And of course, the Catholic Church is instrumental in delivering humanitarian aid to Cuba. I wondered if you discussed that and whether there was any disagreements on U.S. policy towards Cuba.
Well, we discussed, we've provided $6 million of humanitarian aid, U.S. humanitarian aid that was distributed by Caritas, the Catholic Church agency. We're prepared to do more. In fact, we've offered the regime there $100 million of humanitarian aid that unfortunately so far they have not agreed to distribute to help the people of Cuba. So we did the hurricane relief, but we're offering more. And it's the regime that's not accepting it. It's the regime that's standing in the way of it. So we discussed that, and we hope we can do it because we do want to help the people of Cuba who are being, hurt by this incompetent regime that's destroyed the country and the economy.
Secretary, can I ask about the meeting with the Pope? I mean, after this meeting with the Pope, which you described as cordial and productive, are you going to recommend to the president that he stops criticizing the Pope in social media?
Why would I tell you what I'm going to recommend to the president?
Why would I tell you what I recommend to the president? That is the Secretary of State refusing to say whether he will ask the president to stop publicly attacking the leader of the world's largest religious institution. The answer to that question was right there, and he could not say it.
But beyond that, the president will always speak clearly about how he feels about the U.S. and U.S. policy. The President of the United States is always going to act in what's in the best interest of the United States. I think we can do that and continue to also have a very productive and fruitful and important relationship with the church because it plays an important role in the world as well.
Secretary, can you talk about whether
I called her, I'm sorry.
Secretary Rubio, were there any themes from your conversation yesterday with Pope Leo that resonated with you personally?
Well, if it was personal, what would I tell you? No. Here's the bottom line on that, is that the church is an important global institution. It has a presence all over the world. I know you guys are fixated on who said what about who at what time. I understand all that, okay? Because media, you guys have headlines, you have editors, you have people that want you to post, and these are interesting stories. But at the end of the day, the Pope just returned from Africa, right? A very important continent with growing Christian populations, many of whom are threatened or feel threatened by the spread of radical Islamic terrorism. So we care about that. The Pope and the Church has an interest in Christian communities in Lebanon, a place that we're very involved in trying to establish a peace between Israel and Lebanon. The Church obviously has a very important presence in Latin America. The bishops from Venezuela had just been here a few days earlier, so we shared thoughts about those sorts of things.
You guys are fixated on who said what about who. The press is not fixated. They asked a straightforward question. The President of the United States attacked the Pope on social media. The Secretary of State then met with that same Pope. A reporter asked if he would suggest the president stop. That is not a fixation. That is the most obvious question in the room.
I think it's an opportunity to personally express, our point of view from the standpoint of foreign policy and the areas we're involved in and share insights, but also to gain insights, because the church has a unique role in many of these countries in terms of the insights and information that they're receiving. In some cases in the past, the church has been an important interlocutor, not just with governments, but with societies. And then, of course, on the practical level, the church plays an important role in humanitarian efforts in different parts of the world, and in many places has served as a facilitator of U.S. humanitarian assistance, such as I highlighted a moment ago when it comes to Cuba. Yes, go ahead. I'll get to that problem. Go ahead.
Mr. Secretary, can you say in your meeting with Prime Minister Maloney whether you talked about the possibility of withdrawing U.S. troops from Italy as well as the possibility of the United States withdrawing from NATO altogether?
No, we didn't discuss any specifics like that, and that's a decision for the president to make.
Spain denied the use of its bases during the Iran operation, and Rubio just used that as a reason to question the entire NATO alliance. One country said no, and now the Secretary of State is building a case for American withdrawal from the most important military alliance in modern history. That is not a small moment. That is a very deliberate escalation dressed up as a policy review.
It's a decision every president makes. The fact of the matter, though, is, and I said, publicly, and I've said repeatedly, I've been a strong supporter of NATO throughout my career in the Senate and even now. And one of the advantages of being in NATO is that it allows us to have forces deployed in Europe and bases that allow us a logistical ability to project power in case of contingencies. Well, we had a contingency, and some countries in Europe, like Spain as an example, denied us the use of those bases for a very important contingency that in some ways the denial of those bases actually impeded the mission, not severely, but had a cost, and in fact even created some unnecessary dangers. So if one of the main reasons why the U.S. is in NATO is the ability to have forces deployed in Europe that we could project to other contingencies, and now that's no longer the case, at least when it comes to some NATO members, that's a problem, and it has to be examined. But ultimately, that's a decision for the president to make. His team and people like myself and others will provide him what those potential options are, but ultimately he'll have to make that decision. He hasn't made those decisions yet. As far as recent news of deployments, like for example, those were all already ongoing. For example, in Germany, the troops that were withdrawn, which represent less than 14% of our total troop presence there, that's already pre-programmed. And in fact, all it did is take us back to where we were in 2022. So there was always a plan to do some shifting within NATO. As far as broader changes, I don't have an announcement for you on that today, but that's a decision for the president to make. Certainly, we'll present both options and perspectives, but I don't have anything new to announce on that today.
On that one, Mr. Secretary, your former colleagues on the Hill, Republican senators, believe that troops withdrawal will embolden Putin and will benefit Russia. Do you agree with that?
We'll do what, I'm sorry?
Troops withdrawal will embolden Putin and benefit Russia. Do you agree with that assessment?
Well, in the end, the United States the president is going to always do what's in the national interest. We have global obligations all over the world. We have troop deployments all over the world, and those are constantly shifting and changing. For example, we increased troop presence in NATO in the aftermath of the invasion of Ukraine. So we're always making these decisions, and there were some already previewed before any of this had happened in terms of the base denials. But in the end, look, here the bottom line is we always, while we may be the most powerful country in the world and we may have the most resources, our resources are not unlimited. We have to always assign resources around the world, including military resources, on the basis of what serves the national interest. That's a decision the president has to make, especially within the context of recent developments by some countries within NATO and the stance they've taken towards the United States. But, no decision's been made on that yet. That's something the president's still working through.
Republican senators are warning that troop withdrawal will embolden Putin. Rubio's response was that resources are not unlimited. He just used a budget argument to dodge a direct question about whether pulling back from Europe benefits Russia. The man who spent his entire Senate career calling himself a hardliner on Russia just implied that NATO commitments are a resource management decision.
Have you managed to bridge differences on Iran, both with Rome and with Vatican?
Yeah, I think everybody agrees that Iran having a nuclear weapon is unacceptable. I don't know of anyone who thinks it's a good idea for Iran to have a nuclear weapon except the Ayatollah. So I think the question is, what do you do about it? And the president's actually trying to do something about it. And so, I don't know, I don't think there's any disagreement that they can't have a nuclear weapon. I think the question is, what do you do about it? And, we've had every American president says, they can't have a nuclear weapon. This is the first American president that's actually trying to do something concrete about it. I don't know who would disagree with that. It's an important thing that has to be confronted.
Here is what this press briefing actually revealed. Marco Rubio flew to Rome, met with the Pope, and spent the entire press conference explaining why he could not answer direct questions. He could not say whether he would recommend Trump stop attacking the Pope. He could not say whether NATO withdrawal would benefit Russia. He could not say what was personally meaningful about his conversation with the spiritual leader of the Catholic Church he himself belongs to. What he could say is that Spain denied base access during the Iran operation and that this needs to be examined. That single statement buried at the back of this briefing may be the most consequential thing said in the entire exchange, because it signals that the administration is building a public case for pulling back from NATO, not because of Russia, not because of a security assessment, because one ally said no during a war of choice that most of Europe opposed.